big thanks to Chris Oliver and Golden Ticket for putting all of this together. I've taken a lot from the previous sessions for sure so far. And I'm looking forward to all the other speakers as well. I got to give an extra thanks to Chris Oliver. I think he's probably done more for sharing the game globally than anyone else in my experience in basketball. So, becoming friends with Chris and being part of the basketball immersion community, it's really influenced my thinking and challenged my coaching. And it's provided access to a community of knowledge that I would have never been able to get as this kind of small town guy from Canada. So this is a sincere thanks to Chris for that spirit of sharing. I have to laugh when I looked at the lineup for tonight. It's kind of the schedule tonight is like I think you guys are going to feel like it's The Sopranos. The series has been really good, and then it's going to leave everybody pretty disappointed with the ending. But everybody's going to be mad and confused at the ending. But so we'll see how it goes, and I'm excited to present on it. It's my presentation's about evaluating intangibles to improve culture and performance. I probably should have called it identifying intangibles, because I think that's probably the first and most important thing, kind of figuring those pieces out. But ideally, my hope is that some of the questions posed tonight, they'll help you reflect on your own approaches and come up with your own creative ideas around it. The reason I chose the topic is I think there's it's a sort of kind of fake hustle area of leadership right now. I think too many people are putting things in handbooks and on their walls or on their social media, things that they aren't accurate representations of what's going on in the day-to-day of their team or organization. And I think diving into that is important. So it's going to it's becoming something that's really important, especially the topic of culture. So, I always heard like core in Latin is literally heart. So when considering your core values, you have to kind of consider what's in your heart as a coach and what's in your organization's heart. And with my team, I'm trying to bring whatever's written on the walls or in their handbooks and write it on their hearts. And I want them to believe it and feel for it. And that's my goal as a teacher. I think we're in a real crisis in 2020, and that's without a worldwide pandemic. I think we have a real struggle with image versus identity right now. And we have a real responsibility as teachers and leaders of young people to try and help them figure out how to cultivate an identity that they're proud of, instead of an image that they want to project and protect. It includes teams, to be honest. As a leader, you need to focus far more on the substance and identity of your team than on the image you project about your team. We have, far too many people in 2020 that are, a mile wide and an inch deep. So I think we've got we have some responsibility there as people who are in positions of leadership and teachers. So the leadership pyramid is something I kind of start with, and I'd ask you the question of just where do you spend most of your time? So in basketball, I think the top of the leadership pyramid is around tactical knowledge. So it's the smallest piece is, do I know the strengths and weaknesses of my team? Their team, can I adjust to win? Technical knowledge, do I know the skills of my sport and can I teach them? Do my athletes respond to my teaching? Intrapersonal knowledge, do I know myself? Am I authentic? Do I invest in myself? Do I know my strengths? Do I know my weaknesses? And then interpersonal knowledge is, do I know other people? Can I relate to them? And do I have empathy? Your social emotional ability. So for the most part, where I'm going to be sticking in terms of intangibles is in those bottom two blocks. And, challenging some thoughts, sharing some things that, maybe more along my line of thinking has helped me clarify some of the intangibles that I believe in and help move along success. So what are the intangibles? So for me, again, I think that you get to the skills and the tactics are kind of the top of the iceberg. So they're the thing that everybody sees, and it's kind of player development, your on-court skills, your game tactics. And we recruit them and we try and get them on our team for the top of the iceberg usually. But their athletic skills will absolutely rise no higher than their behavior skills. So the skills and tactics, I think, get covered ad nauseum, but we say we look for the other qualities, but we'll often prioritize the top of the iceberg over these other qualities. So for me, it's like we talk about toughness with our team, and these are different for everybody. These are different for every team, but we talk about physical dependability, your mental dependability, your performance consistency. Talk about your desire, your competitive spirit, that the school or the team means something to you. You have an uncommon efforts, growth mindset, alignment. And then we talk about being responsible, disciplined, mature behavior, belief in the team and the coaches. So all of these things, they're unique to each of your teams, and it's something that's, I think you need to spend time considering and not kind of taking from, you can take from everywhere, I guess is great, but I think that you do need to spend some time, with some sustained thought and reflection on this stuff. And if we'll kind of, again, like I said, we'll say we look for these other qualities, but we'll often prioritize the top of the iceberg over these other qualities. So if they're truly non-negotiable for you, then the way explained to me that I think was really kind of clarifying for me was, it means that strength in one area will not compensate for weakness in another. So a non-negotiable is meaning that strength in one area will not compensate for weakness in another area. So I think it's important for you to spend time thinking about what are the non-negotiables of your team. People use the term all the time, but in reality, most of the time what they're talking about in terms of being non-negotiable is actually pretty fluid. Usually when things become negotiable in those areas of the iceberg below the water here is when there's a lot of the iceberg showing above the water. So when the talent of a player or person is impossible to miss, I always love how negotiable everyone's non-negotiables get when they have a super talented player. So another thing, this pandemic's just killing me here because I'm just spending so much money at Home Depot, but I enjoy these home renovation shows too much. But every time I watch them, I think about how it relates to prioritizing, but also what gets left behind as a project moves forward. So every time people start these projects, they begin with this kind of grandiose picture of what their house is going to look like. And as it goes, they kind of start spending more money on all of the things inside of the house, but then they neglect their landscaping. So they go from having the initial plans with this nice pool, beautiful trees, and a manicured lawn, to hopefully putting some sod down and maybe sort of sweeping the front walkway so it's not dirty. Your team is similar to that, and you don't have an unlimited budget. Your time, your resources, everything is finite. So as you add pieces to the project, you always have to realize that you're taking something away from somewhere else. I'm not the person to say whether your decisions about that are right or wrong, but you have to realize that by doing one thing, you are at times eliminating your ability to do another. So ultimately what often gets shortchanged is these intangibles. So the pieces we always talk about being so important to our culture, but they're like the landscaping on the outside of our house. We just leave them to the last, or we forget about them, or we give a handbook out at the start of the season and we think that that's enough, and we just throw it in a backpack somewhere and we don't ever revisit it. It's counterintuitive to really my beliefs around building a sustainable program. So I'm a big Josh Medcalf disciple. So in 5 years here at Acadia, I'm being very honest with you, we haven't spoken about goals once. We don't talk about goals. We're totally focused on the daily process. Me personally, I'm really kind of A-type and organized. I think most of us as coaches are, like, we're organizers. So that's why we get into it. So I was always I was really focused on the next thing. I had a really hard time being present in the moment. Then after reading The Cubs Way, it's a great book, learning more about kind of Joe Madden and his freewheeling ways as a baseball manager, and then reflecting on the leaders who I always admired, who taught me, coached me, whatever it was. I believe in the statement, be present, not perfect, so much that I tattooed it on my wrist, right, where I'd have it where my phone, if I'm looking at my phone, I see the tattoo on my hand or on my wrist, so that it just reminds me to get myself back to where I'm supposed to be. For me, I needed to stop being so focused on the destination or the results and start actually enjoying the journey and the process. And I found that to be more impactful for performance in my relationships anyway. So an image that really kind of sticks with me is, in terms of performance and to keep us in check, I think if you want your car to go faster, do you stare at the speedometer? And ultimately we don't, right? Like we have to get under the hood of the car and focus on the engine if you want to go faster. So you need to be able to focus on the things that actually drive performance. So for us, that comes down to belief, which drives behaviors, which drives performance. An important thing to remember about this is, as well, now that I'm kind of saying this out loud, I may go off track, but is to keep in mind that the performance of the car is probably a good analogy. You don't add more things to an F1 race car to make it go faster. They're looking for ways to make it lighter, how to remove things from it, what's non-essential. I think this holds true when thinking of the performance of your team as well, is don't overload them so much with stuff that they can't do, or that they're just it's not even going to impact their performance. It's not going to help them, move forward. So how to sell it? How do you get your team to value these kind of important intangibles? Because they're not sexy, right? It's easy to entice them to try and learn a new move, shoot the ball more, but like I said, this stuff is harder to capture and harder to assign a value to. So Fergus Connolly talked about this the other day, about the fact that we're all broccoli salespeople. So we're trying to sell a product that isn't really that catchy, and it's going to provide us with very little immediate satisfaction and cost about the same as something that's far more attractive. First of all, we need to stop taking so much time to try and hook them in. We need to start to adjust to the attention span of the generation that we're coaching, and we need to grab them in about 15 seconds or less. So you need to appeal to their emotions, not their logic. For me personally, I can watch an hour-long documentary about how McDonald's is going to kill me, and then see a 15-second clip of a Big Mac and fries, and you're going to catch me at Mickey D's drive-in to go and grab a burger. So we have to figure out how to capture their attention about those things that we value, that we think are important. So to do that, I think that storytelling is sometimes just as powerful as showing video, because storytelling takes passion. Storytelling shows passion. All you need to do is be able to create a picture in their mind or imagination, and that's all the visual they need. We don't coach them to play, we coach them to learn how to play. So really, that's the difference between coaching human beings and human doings, in my opinion. Like, we have to figure out how to coach human beings, not human doings. So when you come back to these things, you always have to be thinking, how am I grabbing their attention with a visual or a story or something that they can draw on? I can almost tell you for sure that our team can't recite all of the different, core things or the values or different paragraphs or whatever it is, but they can tell you a story about each one of them that, relates back to why we value something in our team. They can tell you a story about a player. They can tell you a story about, us emphasizing something. So stories are powerful. Stories are things that kind of leave that visual imprint for people. So I grew up on the water, and this is something that really kind of stuck out to me as I was thinking more about it and trying to explain it more and trying to create, again, like that visual for all of us is, how do you attach a number or an analytic to subjective data? So, I watched Coach Triano's presentation earlier, and I've listened to the other ones as well. And obviously, like, there's some concrete things that you can assign data points to, and it makes a lot of sense. But how do you attach a number or an analytic to subjective data? And my opinion is, I don't think you can. I think that if you can't do it, then how do you measure it? So for me, I grew up on the water, and one of my favorite things to do is race sailboats. I've done it for my whole life, and it's one of my favorite parts of, even in the summertime, even now, as an older guy, and go back to race sailboats during regatta weeks. And I'd argue actually that there isn't a better example of teamwork than to watch crews of a sailboat or an America's Cup sailboat. But I won't get too far into the weeds of that here. But with all of this, I think we're ultimately trying to evaluate something that's the same as catching the wind on a boat. There are lots of tools to measure how fast the wind is blowing, which direction it's coming from, how it's bouncing off the shore. But those won't help us necessarily make our boat go faster. They're just information. And for us, we're trying to make the boat catch the wind the right way and feel good. That's the sailors thing that we always say is the boat, we're always waiting for the skipper to tell you that the boat feels really good right now. We're really going to struggle to measure that. Like I said before, staring at the speedometer is not going to help you make your boat or your car go faster. So something that we use in sailing is we use the telltales. So you see the arrows pointing to all these little dots on the sails. They're telltales in the sail. And telltales don't give you a number. They tell you how your sails are trimmed. So my question to you is, in your program, is I would ask you is, who's watching your telltales? So you learn about telltales early on as a little sailor. They call us wet feet when you're a little kid learning how to sail, but they're small pieces of fabric they attach to your sail. They don't give you a measurement of anything in terms of numbers, but they tell you how the wind is flowing over your sails. And they give you live feedback about whether you should turn the boat upwind, downwind, trim your sails in, let them out. There's kind of lots of other sail tuning terms that excite me, but probably bore you, but you get the idea. The other interesting thing about them is that they're useless when it's calm with no wind. So that's a pretty simple analogy for us here. It's that you won't need telltales when things are going great and everything's perfect. But they're particularly effective at helping you to trim your sails for performance in more challenging situations. For us, we needed to build in telltales into our program and figure out what the telltales were, how we evaluate them, who some of our telltales are. For us, one of our big telltales is our leadership group, or we call them culture keepers. So bringing those people in as the conventional captains, but bringing them in on a regular basis and having them be telltales to give us more of a temperature of our program, tell us how the wind is kind of flowing over our sails, I think is really, really important. I heard Carly talk about this the other day, which is awesome, and Mike addressed it as well just tonight. And the idea of psychological safety, Google unleashed this, when they did their survey and analysis of performance, that it's become much more present in the minds of people looking to address performance within their own organizations. It's the number one quality to unlock performance, and without it, you're never going to get where you're hoping. The funny thing is that every leader thinks they have it. I'm here to tell you, like, if you can have an open door policy all you want, and you can say all these things all you want, but if no one ever knocks on your door, you don't have psychological safety on your team. One of my telltales through the years has been how often players will come in to talk when I haven't requested the meeting. I'm also really cognizant of how often I'm the one who has to break the conversational ice, particularly with younger players. Especially nowadays, you'll get to a point where, as people would almost rather put their face in their cell phone and walk by at times before, having a conversation with you. But I think one of the best ways to make someone feel good in an organization is to notice how they behave. And it doesn't always have to be publicly that you notice them. Sometimes it's just as powerful to catch someone in the hall and just notice something about them, just quickly talk to them one-on-one. But then if you want to make them feel valued in the organization, you give them a skill. So if you want to have somebody feel valued as part of your group, then you give them a skill to use. Those moments are kind of easy to catch, and there's nothing more impactful than a statement that layers a skill with a behavior. So, we can all envision sitting at the end of practice. We're all in our huddle, finished practice, and we say something like, "Sally did a great job of reading the slips on that screen today." That's a great moment for Sally, and it's a good one, but it's more of a celebratory moment for everybody. You've impacted Sally to a little bit, to an extent, but you haven't really impacted the rest of the team. Maybe unless they're jealous or they thought Sally didn't do a good job of slipping screens. But the part with layering a skill with a behavior is, if you said Sally did a great job of reading the slips on that screen today, but that's not surprising considering all of the work she's been doing, looking at video and coming in to ask questions about it. And what that does is, layering the behavior onto the skill, is it helps you to impact other people's behaviors too, because they see you giving credit for the behaviors that you want to see in the team. I think that's a really, really powerful way of getting people to feel good, but also to feel like they are valued in the team. It keeps them safe. It gives them license to kind of do more and say more. I think Red Bull's become masters at this stuff. If you do any kind of research into it, they're just amazing, because they're really trying to unlock human performance. And they've gone from this like ragtag energy drink sponsor to literally putting Felix Baumgartner into a supersonic free fall to Earth from the outer edges of space, all in the name of advancing what's possible for humans. And the cool thing about them is what they do is they put a lot of work with their athletes into high perceived risk, but low actual risk with their athletes. So Felix Baumgartner, for instance, he might be able to jump from space, but he might be afraid to public speak. And I always remind myself of like the Jerry Seinfeld bit where it's, most people would rather be in the coffin than giving their eulogy, right? So one's obviously far more risky than the other, but to establish a psychologically safe environment, I think you have to work around the edges with your athletes to find activities that are high perceived risk and help them navigate their way through them. So team building activities are great for this, but my challenge to you on that is to just not autopilot. Don't check boxes with the team building activities. Put as much time and thought into planning those things as you would the scouting report for a championship game. Ultimately, you want those athletes to go through that stuff. You kind of want them to feel some fear, realize that the environment that they're in is safe, and then you get to coach them up inside of it. And I think those things they're really powerful and around helping with psychological safety. I think that can be, a bit of a thing to unlock your performance for sure. Richie the elephant. So Richie was a kind of a fun sociological experiment I did with our group. So during our individual meetings after our first semester, this year, I bought and I thought that we had some issues with some things that weren't being talked about. So I bought a huge stuffed elephant and put it directly behind my chair in the office. And all 16 players came in for a meeting, but I was looking for 4 things specifically. So I was looking for who didn't even notice it, who noticed it and didn't say anything, who noticed it and said something about it to other people, and who noticed it and addressed it with me. The part that's interesting, I think it's an area you need to work on with your team and figure out if they're willing to talk about the elephant in the room. Because most people sit somewhere between the second and third bullets, in my experience. And the third one is particularly damaging. For us, I'll just be honest with you. We had the bulk of our team. We had, out of the 16 players, I think we had 3 who noticed it and addressed it. The bulk of them were number 2. So they waited for me to address it. They were, they were sitting there kind of at some point later on, they were all waiting to, like, when I walked into the locker room with Richie under my arm, and they were like, finally, we can figure out what this elephant is all about. But it's such a microcosm of just like, you have to entice them. You have to kind of empower them as athletes, as people in your organization, to be able to speak up in the moment, and actually address the elephant in the room. So again, it fits with the visuals idea that I'm trying to get across, but I love storytelling with this stuff. I love giving visuals. I love giving these things so that they can remember and remind themselves when these things are happening, because we can get to that point where something's going on and you can feel it, or what it is. And I can just say to somebody, man, like Richie's in the room, and they'll speak up. They'll go, yeah, you're right. Like, I'll have to talk about this now. So this
Coach, can I pause you for 1 second?
Yeah.
The 3 athletes that you had, were they upperclassmen by chance, or were they spread out?
They weren't, but 2 of the 3 of them were in our kind of leadership group.
Okay, makes sense. I saw you post this, I believe, on social, and it was really interesting experiment. Awesome. Yeah. Keep going. That's great stuff.
So the idea of this comes up, I think of courage all the time, but courage as it relates to conversations is really important, because I'm a former English teacher, so I believe strongly in the power of language. We never, ever talk about tough or difficult conversations. We just don't talk about it. We don't use those words. We talk about having courageous conversations, because the conversations we view as tough or difficult, actually, I think, just require courage. And again, it's flipping the script on them, is not making it a negative, because if you hear tough, you're going to have a tough conversation. You're going to have a difficult conversation. That's not something I want to do. But when I hear that I'm going to have a courageous conversation, that's something that I get to prove. I get to improve. I get to improve my courage. I get to prove my courage. And I think that's important. It's focusing on the behaviors and virtues that you want to have and putting that into your language as a team is really extraordinarily powerful. Courageous conversations, I think, is where things fall off the rails for most teams. It's been really impressed upon me by one of my mentors that great coaching is in the moments. Like, that's great coaching is in the moments. And these are typically the moments where people flinch. So one big area this comes into play for everyone is I'm probably not, I shouldn't swear. My mom would be mad at me if I swore on this, but it's talented, and you can fill in the blank of what you'd imagine that to be, but is dealing with that talented person. So the person who has a lot more of that iceberg above the surface of the water, you better have the courage to navigate those conversations, or they're going to run and ruin your team. There's nothing more discouraging to a great teammate than watching you tolerate a bad one. And that's regardless of their skill level. So we wanted to create a culture of communication here. And that was important to us, because I know that it's something I value as an employee a lot. I value that as a person a lot. I'm somebody that I need you to communicate with me. I'm really an over communicator. So I think generally is, to be honest, is I think when there's a void in communication, we actually become more negative. Our head doesn't flip to the side of like really positive thoughts. It flips to the side of what could have gone wrong here. What's so negative about this situation, or they don't like me, and I think of that in the terms of an athlete a lot is, I think athletes will leave our gyms a lot and have things that have gone unsaid. And you think when they leave, they're not playing that out as like a real big positive. They're going to stew overnight with that, thinking it's really, really negative, or the reason you didn't talk to them, or, whatever, is because you thought they were terrible or whatever it is. And that's how people spin out of control when there's a void in communication. So something I heard a while ago was the idea of truth over harmony. And as I kind of progressed and watched people, I saw that often that theory, I felt like for a while, was what seemed to embolden or give license to coaches or leaders to treat people like dirt, in the name of being truthful. And it often created a less harmonious environment. So again, I think this is another great, like coaching is in the moments area, but it's important to tell people the truth while treating them with dignity. And this can create more harmony because people know where you stand and know where they stand. So it's going to force you doing that stuff. It's going to force you to work on your ability to critique them without being a critic. And critics tend to be more personal and keep hammering at messages that have already been delivered. Critiquing someone focuses on the performance, not on the person, and it's collaborative. We've gotten a lot of runway in our program. A couple rules of thumb with this is, first is a Chuck Dalyism, is don't leave scars on your players. It's metaphorical, obviously, but don't leave them with statements or moments from you as a coach that leave them with a negative scar they can't get rid of. The others from the Cubs, again, the Chicago Cubs. But if you find yourself saying something about someone when they're not there, you're obligated to tell them. So cowards spend a lot of time talking about people, and this rule forces them to navigate the courageous conversations that need to happen inside of your team. And it also forces coaches to do this too. We give ourselves way too much rope, way too much license with this stuff. And we'll spend time just complaining about players or complaining about things that they can't do or why they're a certain way, instead of actually trying to help them. When you put that rule in place, it forces everybody to think about what they want to say out loud. You can think whatever you want to think, but once you start to put it out of your mouth, then you're going to have that act of, I'm going to tell that person that I'm saying this about as well. So if you say it about them when they're not there, you have to tell it to them. That's one of our big rules. Some questions that you can ask your athletes to help better understand them early on, I think, are what motivates you? What frustrates you? How do you hope to develop? Do you have any barriers to that currently? And what gets you excited to get out of bed? They're great questions that you can use to start the conversation with your athletes when it's one-on-one. I'm pretty introverted myself. So like, if there's a big party, I'm not going to be in the center of the thing. I'm going to be I'm going to be the wallflower probably. And so it's these types of things I struggle at times to navigate. So these types of questions have really helped me. Especially if you're a little anxious about the conversation and realizing that they're probably a little bit anxious about the conversation too. I think these aren't one-word answers. So for the 2020 people that are coaching, younger people, not having one-word answers or things that you can pull out of them more, like Mike McKay always talks about, is just not letting them get away with just coach speak and the quick answers. I think these types of questions will help get to the core of their heart again. And it's about what they are, not what they do. So that feeds into, for us, is Ikigai. So Ikigai is basically why you get up in the morning. And I think one of my mentors is a softball coach, and he spent a lot of time in Japan while competing, and they've really taken this on with their athletes. And recently we were speaking with one of his captains, and she really hammered home how important this was for her as an athlete and her self-discovery as an athlete, which obviously makes it both important for us to know about ourselves as coaches, as well as to work to understand this about our athletes. So for most of us, we're just a stop along the journey for them, along their discovery of the Ikigai. But we have to help show them what they're good at, what the world needs, and give them an outlet for their passions as well. So I think that this has been an important one, as I'm kind of progressing through and thinking about my role as a teacher, and it's even been important personally, just considering this stuff about myself. And essentially what it is following your bliss is where it kind of loosely gets translated to. So it is very, very interesting stuff, and something that I think you can consider with your own team. So questions everyone has, in your organization. I think Tim Kike, I pulled this from him years ago, and the questions that everybody asks are, where are we now? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What do you want me to do? And how am I doing? And you need to answer these questions for everyone on your team, including the staff. And you need to spend a lot of time, especially in 2020, on the last two. It's not about false praise or false encouragement, because that's where you lose the high performers. But you need to be giving them feedback in these areas almost daily. It helps them with role definition in terms of, what do you want me to do? And how am I doing? Is I to be honest, this is one of the big shifts I've seen just, transitioning through the years, is they're so unsure of themselves. They're so unsure that what they're doing is the right thing. That reinforcement of when they are doing the right thing, or how am I doing, is so important. And they should be getting feedback on that, just on a constant feedback loop. It should be a big piece of your practice. It should be a big piece of your day, as your time as a coach, for sure. So the next one is another thing that I kind of challenge you to think about is the concept of sisu. So it's a Finnish concept. It's essentially grit. So it's stoic determination, tenacity of purpose, grit, bravery, resilience, and hardiness. It's Finland actually identifies it as like their cultural, identity. But there's no literal English translation. The closest thing is go, is basically, it's pure act. But it's something that was shared with me by a coaching colleague. He's a skeleton coach. So, honestly, if I can ever recommend anything to you guys, is just spread your wings to create relationships with coaches outside of the sport, because I've learned so much from coaches outside of the sport, especially in this area. But what I found after seeing it is that it really helps to sum up grit for our athletes. It's being able to see and evaluate this in our athletes is absolutely crucial to success. So you're really going to struggle with measuring this one, but it's a great telltale of success. I think to foster it even more is to make sure that it's celebrated more than other things. So if grit or sisu is the number one predictor of success, we need to find ways to celebrate and value those moments above others. Then conversely, make sure we're having the courageous conversations with our athletes when they don't show grit. So again, great coaching's in the moments. So find video examples early to show your athletes of these things. We spend so much time showing them video of skills or tactics, but take the time to have these examples displayed in video sessions or sending it to them. Show them you value it by smashing them over the head with images and stories about it as often as you can. I think Steve Kerr always resonates with me in this one, because when he took over the Warriors, it was, the story went that he basically came into the organization. They pulled down all of the posters and graphics and everything on the walls, because all they were individual shots of players. And everything that went up in its place were visuals of things, basically sisu. So, the team concepts and grit moments and toughness times. And I think that's something that was, being able to have those visuals daily. What do you see daily is incredibly important. And, that's a pretty good coach doing it at a pretty high level. I like the subtleties of that. So it was very kind of cool to hear that story. So the next piece is the 3 types of budoka. So Budo is a Japanese term describing modern Japanese martial arts, and literally it means the martial way, but it can be thought of as the way of the warrior. So this concept of the 3 types of budoka is an interesting one when you're thinking about people pursuing performance in any craft. So the idea applies particularly well to us as coaches when evaluating what we're dealing with as individuals. I won't tell you precisely who on the screen I think are which type of budoka, but I can tell you that after watching The Last Dance, I was quite taken with one of them as being the person who's trying to gain a good heart. I thought that was really kind of interesting watching that documentary, episode 9 particularly. So I think you're constantly trying to move all humans towards becoming people who try to gain a good heart, but you also can't be upset or write people off if that's not what they're concerned with at the moment. And we're going to find a lot of people are like the Budoka 1, especially in 2020. So you've got to try to move them along the continuum, and that's going to require you to kind of meet them where they are and understand what they value, why they value it, and then help them to widen their lens to advance to the next. Stage. So this is the big one for me, and it's a large concept. I'm probably not going to do it enough justice in this time, but I hopefully get you guys some stuff. Is the pit of despair, and I think we spend very little time on trying to affect change here with our athletes, and it is where the intangibles live. It's the idea is, I've always loved this story from the West Wing. So it's, the old fable is this guy's walking down the street and he falls in a hole, and the walls are so steep that he can't get out. And a doctor passes by and the guy shouts up, "Hey, can you help me out?" And the doctor writes a prescription. He throws it down in the hole and moves on. And then a priest comes along and the guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole. Can you help me out?" And the priest writes out a prayer and he throws it down in the hole and he moves on. And then a friend walks by and he says, "Hey, Joe, it's me. Can you help me out?" And Joe jumps in the hole. And our guy says, "Are you stupid? Now we're both down here." And Joe says to him, "Yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out." And I think as coaches, even as teaching that stuff to our upper athletes and our leaders, I think we need to spend time as coaches jumping into the pit with our athletes and helping them out. So the improvement cycle, or the pit of despair, essentially goes like you're at a skill level, you feel like you're the best, you're confident, you're feeling great. Then you start to descend as you're trying to move to the next layer or level. You're kind of thinking, wait, am I really that good? Then you realize, no, I'm not. But the part, it was a business leader actually that showed me this piece, was I think it's really interesting, is the idea of the bridge of hope. You can, I think, affect some change by having courageous conversations with your athlete or performer that you're dealing with before they get to the pit of despair, and help them over that pit. I think you can help them across that by giving them some hope. I think that you can help them across that by giving them some quick realizations and having courageous conversations that maybe go further than just their skills and tactics. Like they go into some of their behaviors and traits that are going to require some courage from you to actually address with another person. But you can help them across that bridge. Then they move up to the next layer of performance. Obviously, I feel better, but I'm still terrible. Can we stop this yet? And then they kind of go, holy crap, like I'm way better. How did this happen? And then they get to the next stage where their performance is so much higher and they're improved so much more. And they're thinking, what's next? Like, how do I get back into this loop, this improvement cycle again? But I think helping them across that area, just focusing a little bit on that bridge of hope, for us in 2020, it's going to help us with our athletes' mental health. It's going to help us with their perception of themselves, and it's going to help us get them to a stage of performance even quicker than before. So if it's self-serving that you got to do, then go for it. So this piece is always, it's maddening for me a little bit, but we always hear this, like, we're players first, but are we really? So their opinions are valid. You need to seek the feedback out. And then how do you do it? So this is kind of getting back to the evaluating stuff. And I've only talked, to be honest, probably just about identifying some things. And it's tough. This is an interesting topic for sure. But I think it's a huge area right now, is after we give our athletes psychological safety and we empower them to speak to us, we need to listen to them. So Kevin Eastman said it best. He said, we need big eyes and big ears to see behaviors and listen to what people are telling us. I think the players are absolutely the best source of information and one of the best telltales for your program. It can be minor things or major things. For me personally, it can dip into the technical, tactical as well. I guess an example of the simple for me would be, we always did team pregame meals when I started coaching. It was something we did when I was coaching in high school. I thought it was really important for the team and the team development. And then some of our players came to me and told me that they'd rather not do it. And my knee-jerk reaction right away was like, you're selfish, like you don't get it. It's you're not part of the team and you're not trying to be part of this team spirit. And then I realized that they're university students. They spend all their time together. We just drove 6 hours on a bus together. The last people that they want to see are each other right now. And the other thing they don't want to do is they don't want to go sit in a restaurant. They don't want to wait for the food, and they don't want to order stuff they don't want to order. So it was forcing a time on them to go sit in a restaurant and wait for that versus sitting in a hotel room with food they like that they had bought previously and kind of not cluttering up game day was actually a way better strategy. But I didn't think of it that way because it was something that I just always done. I just always thought pregame meal, you got to do it. It's nutrition, it's this. And then I realized, man, they're probably eating worse when they're going to the restaurants than they are just planning their own meals and eating them in the hotels. The complex side of it, where it's a bit more like it's a shot to your ego and it's a shot to your planning and stuff, was season before last. Our culture keepers came to me after our preseason was over and we had a disastrous preseason. And they told me they hated our offense that we had just installed. We had taken, 2 months to install it. He said, we hate it. We can't play it. We absolutely hate it. You have to change it. We want to scrap it all. And that was harder to digest and adjust to, obviously. But in that one, I had to put my money where my mouth was. I keep telling them that, their opinions are valid. Their opinions are important. And I kind of went against, I said, I'm not going to try and convince you that this is what it's supposed to be. We all needed to roll up our sleeves and put the work in, and I needed to listen to them. And to be honest, they were absolutely right. They were absolutely right. So I won't tell you which offense it was, but it definitely wasn't fitting for us. So how to do it is important. These are things that we do. It's not a perfect science. And to be honest, I'm leaving this until the end because I'm hoping that as you reflect on some of the things I'm sharing tonight about kind of my thought process around it, my hope is that you find the best way for you to measure them in relation to your group and your preferences. We do a lot of different things to try and take the temperature of our team and all of the individuals at any given moment. But some of the things I found most impactful are daily practice survey. Something we do, and it's like I just have it here, but we do it every day. It's tactile. So I appreciate the apps and I appreciate that stuff, but I do feel like on some level I get that it's fast and it tracks it and it keeps it in an area where it's easier to manage. But I also do think that it's something that people zip through. I know myself, like if it's on a phone or a computer, I zip through things really fast. But when it's a pen, there's that level of permanence to it that I'm actually going to have to think about this. Like this has some impact. So we do a post-practice evaluation and it basically asks them 8 things, and we do it immediately following practice. So when they're cooling down, our therapists give them these small pieces of paper and they write them and then they give them to me. So they rate my focus, my energy, my performance, level of a teammate, level of knowledge, level of confidence, my competitiveness, and my fun. And they rate all of those 8 qualities on a scale of 1 to 5. So for us, we needed to give them a visual for the scale, because the scale is just whatever. The scale doesn't make any sense to it's going to be different to each person. So we said that 1 is a bronze baby. So for us, that's a national championship. So you take, for instance, the level of a teammate. So if you put 1 for today in practice, then you think that you practiced enough as a teammate. You were enough of a teammate for us to win a national championship. 2 was winning a conference championship, so winning an AUS banner. 3 was we made the playoffs. 4 was we went home in March, so we didn't make the playoffs. And 5 was kind of one, and again, I like to get people laughing and kind of carrying on a little bit, but 5 was go play for another school. So that's 1 through 5 for us, and it was visual. It was something that we could really grab onto and go for it. But the 9th question was the important one for me, because my wife tells me I miss everything. I miss all the signs all the time. And so the question that it is just do you need to connect? And it's a yes, no, circle it. And for me, I've had so many conversations through the years that I would not have had 100%. I would not have had the conversations that I've had through the years without this survey, without seeing something that they wouldn't have brought forward to me if they didn't get a chance to say, yes, I need to connect. Or my fun today was a 4. My energy or my performance today was a 4. And the other thing that I do is I rate them too. So I rate what I thought every practice in my Excel sheet. So it goes against them. So if I see big discrepancies in those numbers, that precipitates a conversation too. And it helps me to it's a good telltale for me to know when to have conversations with my athletes. The other ones we use is, Google Forms and Slack surveys. They do love technology. Like it's good ways to get the quick and dirty answers, that you kind of need to get. Google Forms, one that we use for an example, we do kind of a coach I need survey. So we just asked the question in the Google form. And again, I wouldn't get the answers that I would want to get, or that I would hope to get, even to have you with some sustained thought if I asked these to them in person. But, coach, I need you to start. Coach, I need you to stop. Coach, I need you to keep doing da 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 da. So 3 quick answers. You can limit how many characters or how long those answers are for each person. But, getting that type of feedback fairly regularly is incredibly powerful to adjust your own sales, and especially with each individual, to try and figure out what they're feeling, how they're doing. And that matters. It's important. We'll use game day prizes. Everybody does this stuff, but I think you need to attach significance and meaning and stories to it. And, we had a jacket that was from a 1950s team. It was their warm-up jacket, and we took it out of our Hall of Fame. And that was our kind of game day prize for the player selecting the top player on our team. But it became a real story because it was the sisterhood of the traveling jacket. Like, this jacket fit on everybody. It fit on our post players. It fit on our 5-foot point guard. It even fit on our assistant coach. He was a guy, and he's not our player size for sure. So it fit on him at the end of the season too. So it became a story, and it became something else that we can tell. And I think those types of prizes are important. Put some thought into them and make them new every year. I challenge you on it is, if it's just the same old thing, then it's not going to have the same significance, and create something. We did a yellow, the maillot jaune. So, for the cycling. So the leader of the pack, we called it one year, and they got an actual Tour de France yellow spandex jersey that they'd wear. And our players would give to each other. We had the Queen of the Mountains the same year. So it was the polka dotted jersey that they'd give to the Tour de France winner, who was the King of the Mountains in the Tour de France. So, for somebody that conquered something in a game that was special, that was awesome, that they had been working on. And it was a chance for the players to recognize things about each other. It was really good telltale for me to see who they're giving what to. It does give you a bit of a temperature of the team, that stuff. Pre-briefs and debriefs. Pre-briefing practice. I heard Aaron talking about that they give out their practice plans to their players. We'll do that as well. I'm sure a lot of people do that. But pre-briefing to us is, I think, when you can give out your practice plan, it's important for them to see what those points of emphasis are, and also for you to include intangible things as part of your practice plans, as part of your pre-brief. And if you value these things, then they should be part of your points of emphasis. We often will say they're non-negotiables and they're overarching things, but people can't be the toughest of the tough all the time. It's so difficult to do that stuff. And I think that when you start to pick and choose a little bit more in those areas, it's like, we're really going to value toughness in this drill, or we're really going to value communication in this drill, whatever it is, then you can really nail that stuff down. You can't be, set on 11 all day, every day in every category. It's just, you're going to burn out. You're not going to be able to do it. I love the one actually is with debriefs. That's kind of fun, is you can really get into some different things with debriefs, and you can give that ownership to the players, which gives you a bit of an idea of what they're thinking. Mike's a master at this stuff, just pulling different bits of information out of players. We use his, agree, build, or challenge. We ABC everything. So if we agree with it, or we build on it, or we challenge it. So it's always interesting to see where players will go with that stuff, and where they'll take, the debrief of the session. We'll have secret accountability partners. So I skipped over that one quickly, but I think a lot of people will do the accountability partners. We'll do them secretly, and we'll assign a behavior or an intangible that we want them to measure. So if we want to make sure that somebody's, they're communicating the whole practice, then they don't know who's watching them, and they don't even know the skill that they're watching. But maybe Sally's watching Sally's watching Joni the whole practice and she doesn't know it. And the point of emphasis that she's watching for is Joni being a great communicator, or is she picking other teammates up throughout practice, or is she hanging her head, or whatever it is. And she's kind of giving her feedback at the end of practice. So because they don't know who they are and they don't know what they're evaluating, it gives you a little bit more of a true barometer of those things. It gives you some true feedback, some real feedback. And the final one that I'd use with some of these things is we'll often assign scoring to technical, tactical things. So if you get an offensive rebound, you get 3 extra points for your team or whatever it is, but assign a disproportionate score or prize to intangible things in practice. I think those types of things are really, really fun for people, and don't make it punitive. Don't make it that, because you will make some things punitive with skills and tactics. So if you give up a defensive rebound, that team loses 5 points, so they automatically lose, or whatever it is. Like, don't make these things punitive. Always keep them positive. So if you're thinking of it as you're trying to impact, somebody hangs their head after every time they make a mistake. Well, every time today that Sally makes a mistake, if she doesn't hang her head and she shows positive body language, her team's getting 5 extra points. And it's something that you can, and you have to be careful about how you're creating these things and manufacturing them. But, you have to kind of let the situations evolve organically. But if you assign those scores to those things, it's just like giving a pet a treat. It sometimes it's enforcing that this is a great behavior. This is something we want to see again. This is something that actually helps your team win. Versus like, I think that we can spend too much time on like, these are the behaviors that don't allow your team to win. It's like, versus these are the things that you do them and they give us a better chance at winning. So I think making things that are positive and assigning disproportionate scores to them, I think that can really, really help your team and help the quality of your practices, help build those intangibles, and help you with your own telltales, see where the wind's blowing over your sails. So hopefully all that makes sense, Chris. I think we're close to the time there.
That's great. So everyone that's asking right now, coach's information's up there. So a lot of questions about the slideshow. If they can email you to get a copy of that. There's also going to be a live replay, but you guys have coach's info there. Coach, we got a few questions here. We got about 5 minutes. Are you good to answer these?
For sure, yeah.
Okay, so going back to your evaluations, when you evaluate and rate the practice 1 to 5, that is the individual just for themselves, or are they evaluating it on the team as well?
It's the individual just for themselves for that practice. And I think that's important. It's just a reflection for them. It's self-reflection. It's not team reflection. And I'm reflecting on the team and trying to see where some of those disparities are. But it's just for them, just a self-reflection.
Okay, great. And then the follow-up on that was, what were the 8 things post-practice on the survey? I know you went through them there, but a couple people missed them.
Yeah, so it's my focus, my energy, my performance, my level of a teammate, level of knowledge, level of confidence, my competitiveness, and my fun. And those are the 8 things there that.
Okay, that's great. Question early on here. When you have athletes from kind of all over the country, do you find there's unique regional cultural challenges you have when you're bringing them in from all over? And do you have to consider that at the start of your season?
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's, to be honest, like we had the National Player of the Year here a few years ago, and she was a dynamo, right? And she was from the U.S. and it was a big difference. Like I think she shaped a lot of my thinking in these things, as well as I think a lot of people had kind of, I think you can easily just different behaviors maybe had her tossed to the side a little bit. And I think figuring out what were my non-negotiables and how do I help her work her way through some of those things was important. But I do think there's huge cultural differences. I'd agree with Mike. Like Mike just talked about this in his clinic is what's culturally appropriate in one area isn't going to be culturally appropriate in another area. And we see that a little bit with our athletes. I think they adjust a bit. Like Canada's a bit, a bit of a place where it's a lot of, yeah, it's fairly diverse anyway. So I think people are more used to that way of thinking. But yeah, it's interesting every time that you kind of interact with people. You know, to be honest, a lot of players from the U.S. It's very different.
Different mentality for sure with those players.
Yeah.
Question here about, do you ever have situations where the girls are struggling with each other emotionally? Obviously, all those situations would be different. How do you handle those situations where you know that struggle's happening?
Yeah, it's figuring it. They're all so different, but I think, you know, it's going back to what are, you know, there are so many different situations that could come out of that, to be honest. But it's having the conversations with the people that you trust to give you some feedback. I think having, you know, really great relationships with your players is something that's incredibly important, and there's huge value in that. But again, like making sure that the culture keepers, the leadership group, the captains of your team are really plugged into what's going on in those areas. They can give you a really good perspective. But the other thing too is that, you know, sometimes I'd be honest, I think we, as a society, generally, we try to solve too many problems for our kids and stuff. And sometimes it's good to just like let them go through some of that stuff and let them try and figure it out. And you know, you can figure out, like it's like Mike said, you can apply this to this as well as just letting them wobble through those, you know, courageous moments and courageous conversations that they may have to have with each other, not just jumping in. I think coaches have a tendency to just try and jump in and solve those problems quickly, because we don't like the storm. But sometimes the storms are good to create some different bits of resiliency.
I agree with you there. We'll go two more here, just on timing. So one here, when you have a young team with a lot of freshmen, how do you create that leadership and get that openness? Because lots of times freshmen don't come in your office. You don't know if they have the leadership skills. So what do you do with a younger team?
It's great coaching's in the moments. I think it's finding moments with those players to build those relationships. I'm far from perfect in that area. I think that, you know, I'd love to say that you hit you get every one of them on, you know, on the same page. And I go, one of my people I really look up to is Wade Gilbert, but he talks about, you know, people catching the virus, which actually has not aged well at all right now. But the concept is basically that you need people who spread the virus on your team, not people who are creating buy-in, or like, because buy-in implies give in. So it's like getting people to actually spread the virus on your team, like get them to feel the way that you feel. And for me, it's been interesting. Like, I think that when you think of it a bit more that way, and figuring out who are the people that are going to go around and touch the doorknobs and make them so that the next freshman that comes in is going to catch that too. I think that's important. So it's spending time with those culture keepers. It's spending time with the upper level players to show them how to lead. I think way too often we talk about getting people's buy-in or holding them accountable, or they need to have more discipline or whatever it is. And we spend no time developing leadership with our upper level players. So they're not in a position. This is the best incubator for them, as for me, for female student athletes, for them to be leaders and for them to, you know, to have some experiences, screw some things up, you know, learn from their mistakes and move forward. But I do think that, you know, freshmen are a particular challenge, and it's a team effort. It's a team effort from the upperclassmen down to, you know, yourself. But you have to try and create those people who spread the virus. I hate saying that right now. It's a terrible thing, but
We understand the concept, I think, nationwide here right now. Okay, last one for you. At all the interventions you shared tonight, what would you say has had the biggest impact, and why?
in terms of the evaluation, like the evaluative interventions, I think the one that's impacted me personally the most is, it would be a toss-up. Daily, it would be the daily practice survey, to be honest. That's given me a lot of perspective. Doing them more on a monthly basis and stuff with previous teams that I've had, the Coach I Need survey always teases out some things that I just missed, that I completely missed them, completely wouldn't have thought about it. And to the point of just like the simplest thing of, this year having a conversation with somebody, and I had been calling her by her last name, which I thought was kind of like a hockey Canadian thing, like term of endearment. And she actually didn't like that. And she wanted to be called by her first name, but she would never say that to me. And it was just those subtleties of that stuff. I've always found that, the coach I need survey and then the post-practice evaluation really help me trim my sails for sure.